Episode 23. Let's get this neck looking a little less white.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So over the course of the last couple of episodes, we've got this neck shaped up and it's pretty close to where I want it. There's a little bit of fine sanding left on it before we can get it to finish, but all in all, I'm very happy with the way that looks. I think it's a really good representation of what I can see that the neck looks like. I haven't got a very good photograph of the back of the neck, so I don't fully understand what Johnny's guitar actually looked like and what the level of relicking would have been. If anyone does have a photograph of that or could point me in the direction of one, that would make me very happy. But as it stands, I'm kind of guessing a little bit as to what the finish is actually going to look like. So we need to do a little bit more sanding on that, which I'll get to in a second. But before we do, I noticed that there's actually a couple of little issues on the fretboard. Most of what's going on with the fretboard I can kind of manage in the normal process of cleaning it up, but I have noticed that there's a bit of a dent in there. I'll bring you in a little bit closer so you can have a look at it. I don't quite know how I've done it, probably dragged it across something, but there is definitely a bit of an indentation there. So before I start to do any sanding, I'm just going to see if I can get that out. And I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little bit of a dent that runs through there. And it's a little bit too deep to try and sand out, so I'm going to try and get it out with a little bit of heat. There's also a bit of one there. And all I'm going to do is I've got just a little bit of rag that I'm going to get a bit of water on so it's damp. And I'm also just going to rub a little bit of water into that area of the fretboard. And hopefully this won't melt. I'm just going to take my soldering iron and press on there with the hope that the heat and the moisture and the steam will just pop that dent out, and it seems to be working just fine, so we'll just do that bit as well. I don't know if you can see there, but that's absolutely disappeared now, so once that dries out properly, I'm sure it'll look absolutely fine. So with that done, we can get this turned over and start to just look at where we need to do a little bit of sanding to get this ready for its finish coats. And I would say that mostly we're pretty close to where we need to be. So I'm just going to take some of this 180 paper and just using my fingers feel for any kind of inconsistencies that there might be, and just give them a quick tickle up. Now I usually kind of gloss over the sanding stage of things a little bit because I don't feel that it's a particularly kind of engaging thing to watch. But I do worry that by doing that I don't really explain too much what I'm doing. And it is quite an important step. When I've finished shaping this with files and chisels and stuff, I actually took some kind of fairly rough sandpaper to it. So I was going at this with 80 and 100 grit, and that's kind of rough enough to finalise the shape and kind of put a nice radius onto all these areas so that I haven't got sharp edges that are going to poke through my finish when I'm kind of sanding that down or polishing it, or in this case rubbing it off altogether. So probably not that important in this instance, but old habits and all of that. And then once I've achieved that, I'm then feeling the neck and looking to see any kind of scratches or any inconsistency or roughness. And then just using this finer 180 paper to kind of smooth those out and get a finish that's nearly ready for putting some finish onto. And then once I've got it to that stage, I will then take either a 220 or a 240 pad. This is a 240. And just give everything a final sand with that. And that's enough. You don't really want to go any further than that if you're going to be applying a kind of a spray-on finish. Because all you're doing realistically is you're kind of burnishing the wood beyond 220, 240, and that actually makes it harder for the finish to adhere, so you're not getting a better job, you're probably introducing an issue that will give you a worse job. So better to finish kind of at 240, 220 level before you go to your lacquer. And we are very nearly at that point. So I'll carry on with this off camera now, just get it finished off and get it ready for the next stage. And with the last of that sanding done, only really leaves one thing to do now, and that's just to get this fretboard masked up and we can get it over to the spray booth. Just prop that up on those for a second. And I'm just simply going to run a line of masking tape down here. I'm actually going to just leave a tiny little edge of the fretboard exposed because I want to feather this edge down when it's all sprayed up so that you can't feel it. And if I was exactly on my line, there's a chance that I'd kind of feather it down on the maple and leave some uncoloured maple exposed, and that's not what I want. Handy little tip there, you can have that one for free. And to lacquer this neck, I've got some vintage amber lacquer. This is from Northwest Guitars, and we used quite a lot of their stuff lately, and it's really good. Really quite enjoy using it. However, the neck on Johnny's guitar is quite dark, and I know from experience that sometimes if you put multiple coats of this on, it looks possibly a little bit too yellow. So I've also got some tobacco brown here just in case, and if it is too yellow, I'll just give it a quick coat of that just to darken it off a little bit. It's a nice, warm, dry, sunny day here, so there's no need for any kind of anti-bloom thinners or anything. So it's a bit of a shake up. Put a fair dollop into a cup. I'm going to just thin this down a little bit to start with. And then if we need to, we can kind of thin it down further as we go. I don't really see the need for doing it. You don't need that really thin coat on a neck that's going to lay down really super flat, because you've got a very curvy surface and any inconsistencies in the finish are kind of very easy to quickly flat out and polish up. So I'm not super concerned about really thin, heavily thinned out coats to give me a super glossy finish out of the gun, because there really isn't any need. And of course, on something that's going to be held up vertically while I'm spraying it, the risk of getting runs in the lacquer are increased. So a thicker lacquer out of the gun is probably a benefit. Right, let's get this in the gun and get the first coats on. And this has had a couple of decent coats now, and it's looking actually quite a nice colour. I don't think this is going to look at all too yellow. I think that is actually very reminiscent of the colour that we want. But it has, however, got a little bit of texture to it, which we don't want in the finished item. So I've just got some 600 wet and dry paper, so quite fine, and very gently, especially around the edges, I'm just going to denib it basically, which means I'm taking off those little lumps, and it doesn't need much, and that will take it back to a nice flat surface, so that hopefully our final coat, which I'll lay down in a few seconds, will go down nice and flat, so we won't have too much kind of work to do. Now, I'm probably going to put some clear coat over this, but I need to do the decal first before I do that. So the next coat won't be the absolute final coat that this is going to get, but it will be the last colour coat. Right, I'll get my mask back on and just give this the final coat of amber. So in the end, this has actually had 4 coats of lacquer. I put 3 on quite quickly, probably leaving 15-20 minutes between each coat. And then after the 3rd coat, just gave it a quick denibbing just to get any lumps out of it. Gave it its 4th and final coat. And realistically, I could have been back working on that after half an hour or so. But I got tied up with some other jobs. And in the end, it was probably nearer 2 hours before I got back to it. So it was all good and dry and ready for a little bit of cleaning up before we move on to the next stages. And it's actually amazing what you can find sometimes once you get a bit of lacquer on, because I thought this neck was going to be just like really plain bog standard maple with no figure whatsoever in it. But I don't know if you can see that. There's just a little bit of flame in there. I'm not sure if that's good or a bad thing, because we are actually trying to replicate another guitar, and I don't know if that had flame in the neck or not, but either way, it's what we've got. As I said earlier, I don't know what the state of the back of the neck of Johnny's guitar was like. I would imagine there was somewhere, but I don't know if that goes all the way through to the bare wood or not. If anybody knows or has any pictures of the back of the neck, I'd be very interested to see them. My feeling is if I can't get any, I will just go with a little bit of light relicking. Maybe knock the gloss off it so it's a nice matte finish and leave it at that. So if anyone can help me out, that would be very, very gratefully received. And there it is with its final coat on, and I think that's looking very, very nice. I'm really happy with the colour. It's not too yellow at all. So we just need to get this masking off. And before this kind of cures up too much, while this lacquer is still relatively soft, we can just very quickly kind of clean up this lacquer line where it's gone onto the rosewood. And again, to do that, I'm just going to give it a quick tickle with a bit of 600 paper, and that seems to be coming off lovely. If you use your finger on here, you can usually kind of sand up to the radius where it starts to drop away onto the neck and get a nice transition that way. Another way of doing it would be to take a sharp blade and kind of very much like scraping binding, just scrape that away. Both methods work absolutely fine. Obviously the frets get in the way, you can get most of it, and then just come back with the paper. So I'll carry on off camera and get the rest of that cleaned up, but we are pretty much there with this one now. The next thing we need to do is sort out what we're going to do in terms of decorating the headstock. I'm not going to go with a replica of the Mosrite decal. That is something that I don't do. All my guitars, whether they're a replica or not, will always have my name on them and not the name of a manufacturer, because I just don't really go with that. It's not something I do. So that's our next step. I've got some design work to do, so I will leave this one here. I'll be back in a few days' time when we can start to get this worked out. Until then, don't forget to like if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.